welcome back. I want to talk about how to select the perfect size jump ring to work with. First off, I'm going to use this tape roll to talk about dimensions of a jump ring. So a jump ring basically is the ring that you can open and close to connect. So in a ring, you have three dimensions to be wary of. One is the diameter, the outer diameter, usually denoted as OD, and then the inside, the inner diameter, ID, and then the thickness of the wire. And it's usually either millimeters or gauges if you're using the imperial system. And a side note is, the bigger the number in gauge, it's counterintuitive, the thinner the wire is. So 18 gauge is a lot thicker than 24 gauge. So, and you can get charts online for that. With this, in determining what is the perfect size of jump ring, it depends on whether or not you are going to weld, or that you're going to use a cold connection, so no welding. Keep in mind, no welding, you need it to be strong, because you don't want it to just open up on its own. So the thicker the wire, generally, the stronger it is. And then you can also harden jump rings by work hardening it. And I'll try to put another video to explain that. But talking about the metal also, whether or not it's strong. Silver is a lot softer than gold filled or brass, and solid gold is softer than sterling silver. So you have to keep that in mind if you're not welding. Now, the size you choose is dependent on the size of the link, the hole, whether or not it can go through. Sometimes if you're shopping online, you can ask your supplier, or most of the time they will label the dimension of the links of the chain. So it needs to go through. So the gauge needs to be small enough. The second thing you need to consider is whether or not the diameter, the inner diameter, is big enough. So in this case, this is one of my favorite chains, this thick curb chain. The diameter inside must be big enough to go through twice, so two sides of the chain, because it's going to be double and not just one side. One side, if you're just going to add a lobster clasp, your clasp. But if you're putting both sides of the chain on, it needs to be big enough to be on both sides. So you can measure out. I'm going to see if you can, I'm going to close this and you can see. If you put it right there and looking at the thickness of the loop, can it clear and also not be past the midpoint, so that you can eyeball it that way? But best to just try and ask your chain supplier. So those are two basic things. Then we're talking about whether or not you're welding or not welding. With not welding, in general, you need it to be at least, I prefer to be 20 gauge, so it's thick enough wire, and you don't have to work harden it too much. Okay, but if you are welding, I have found that the sweet spot for welding is 7.5 watts, maximum 8 watts power, and the gauge being 22 to 24. If it is the case that you are using thicker jump rings, like 20 gauge or 18, So when it's thicker, you just need to up the power to about 10 watts. Anything lower than thinner than 24 gauge, you can try 5 watts power. But if you have too much power and you warp the jump ring, you can just work to make it round. I hope that is useful. I hope you found that to be useful. I am a wholesaler of premium quality chains and findings. I'm going to leave a note below with more information on our company, as well as a link to the Orion Micro Welder that I use in most of my videos.